Mhm.
Hi, and welcome to our presentation of the paper Where are the Red Lines, in which we explore the ethical and legal challenges of large-scale server-side scanning research in our security and privacy field. My name is Florian Hantke from CISPA, and with me is my colleague Raphael Moszczynski, who was mainly responsible for the methodological design of the study. But of course, this work would not have been possible without another three fantastic co-authors, Christine Utz, Sebastian Roth, and Ben Stock. Large-scale server-side scans. Why? Why is this important? Let's take a look at the OWASP top 10. Broken access control. That is something that usually happens on the server side, right? Cryptographic failures. Also something that is done on the server side. Injections. Yes, we have HTML injections on the client side, but think about SQL injections or code injections. And the list goes on and on and on. Many security risks describe server-side issues. And in fact, according to various reports, for example, here, the yearly HackerOne security reports, the majority of the vulnerabilities lie on the server side. We can see problems on the server side, they exist. And it's important to better understand the scale of it. Therefore, we need large-scale server-side scans. Nevertheless, existing literature mostly ignores the server side. There is lots of work looking at the client side. Yeah, for example, analyzing security headers, DOM clobbering, fingerprinting, client-side XSS, and so on and so on, all done on a large scale, analyzing thousands of websites. However, the server side is left out. Of course, there is work on the server side, but these papers usually take a small data set, a data set of open source applications like the Bitnami catalog, but nothing on a large scale. And why is this the case? Well, here, one paper calls the problem by the name: ethical and legal challenges. In most countries, analyzing the server-side issues is more or less illegal and considered as malicious hacking, even if it's done as academic research. Any harm that such research would cause could lead to civil lawsuits, and in some cases even to criminal prosecution that we, of course, want to avoid, right? Of course, we want to know how strict and how clear these legal boundaries are. And on the other side, we have ethical considerations to make. At almost all major conferences nowadays, we have ethics committees. It was unclear to us what and how strict ethical boundaries are and whether server-side scanning research would be accepted or not. In general, we wanted to know and wanted to enable server-side scanning research within a framework that prevents harm for both the researchers and the server operators.
So what were the methods we used to answer our research questions? First, we conducted semi-structured problem-centered interviews with legal experts, ethics specialists, and server operators. Our interviews with legal professionals and research ethics committee members had the character of expert interviews, aiming at the reconstruction of their specialist knowledge related to our research questions. Since legal regulations differ from one country to another, we narrowed the law-related scope of our present study by focusing on German law. For the operators, semi-structured interviews provided insights into their mindsets and opinions on server-side research. In total, we conducted 24 semi-structured interviews. With far more operators than ethics and legal experts, we complemented our findings with a quantitative survey study with operators. The number of respondents who turned in a fully filled-in questionnaire totaled 119. As a key element to all interviews and the survey questionnaire, we used 5 example server-side scanning scenarios presented in form of vignettes. Florian will introduce them with the next slide. Another integral part of both the problem-centered interviews and our survey questionnaire was our proposal for how to improve the status quo for server-side research. Florian will also expand on this part of our study. For analyzing our interview data, we used the procedure of qualitative content analysis, but in a relatively flexible manner. We derived the initial set of codes from our interview guides. Then we enriched our codes at the initial stage of the coding process. After the codebook became saturated, 3 team members coded all interview transcripts in 3 consecutive stages. After each stage, we compared and discussed our codings until we reached an intersubjective agreement within the team that consisted of 2 computer scientists, one also holding a degree in German law, and a social scientist. By the end of the coding process, we identified the key categories and used them to systematically look across different interview transcripts. In this way, we found commonalities as well as differences in what our interviewers had told us about server-side scanning issues and our scenarios. The process of comparative data interpretation was facilitated by writing memos on the main topics represented by our key categories. These memos served as the foundation for writing up our findings. As for the survey, we analyzed its results using descriptive statistics.
Raphael already mentioned its scenarios. We aimed to cover a wide range of potential server-side scanning research based on widely exploited real-world vulnerabilities like SQL injections or invalid HTTP headers that could lead to server crashes. We assigned a name of a fictional security researcher to each scenario. In this presentation, of course, we cannot cover all the scenarios, so let's focus on Charlie. The scenario is the following. Think about a social media platform, for example. Charlie changes his own user ID in the first experiment in a GET request, and later in a second experiment in a POST request to first receive data from another user and then later change data from another user. We then asked the interviewees and the survey participants' opinions about the scenarios. Would it be accepted to conduct such research or not? This helped us to better understand the thought process and mental models underlying the assessment or judgment on server-side scanning research. So let's begin with the legal experts. We can see, and this fact was true for all the scenarios, that the experts always debated similar aspects of law, but sometimes arrived at different conclusions. In Charlie's case, for example, the experts all discussed the same question. Would Charlie break any access control? Can an ID already count as access control? One expert, for example, wondered if we can count something already access control if a standard internet user cannot do that or cannot abuse it. He was wondering if a standard internet user would know what a user ID is. In the end, some of the experts would not count the ID as access control while others would. And for the POST request, well, they all said data manipulation is in fact illegal. They agreed all on the same page here. In general, the legal experts concluded that we need legislative actions to allow such kind of research. For example, as an exception written into statutory law. However, the web is global, right? And it would require an international change in law. In fact, we see some first steps in the right direction here, but I guess it will take time. Another interesting finding for us was that in Germany, we don't have any known criminal precedent cases against white hat hackers. At least that was the fact at the time of writing. All cases were closed before trial. For more details on this fact, I refer to the paper. Now let's come to the ethics perspective. The interviewed REC members considered Charlie's GET requests as less harmful than other scenarios we presented. One expert said if Charlie had a good process to handle all the sensitive data Charlie could gather, this research might be accepted, but it would still lead to discussion in the REC. And the post request would, same as the legal expert said, not be accepted. Interestingly, after a while, all experts asked the same question. Is there a reason Charlie didn't create two accounts that he then tries to change between the two? And this leads us to the general takeaway from the ethics perspective. REC members want to have an ethical discourse, understanding why authors chose one method over another. They also want researchers to consider the potential for harm of their research and balance it against the benefits. The experts also concluded that there is not enough ethical guideline for us researchers, and they hope to improve this in the future. And lastly, it was criticized during the interviews that the REC decisions are made after the research was conducted and not earlier in the process, a point we come to back later in this presentation. Lastly, we talk to the website operators. In my opinion, a very important perspective is these are the people who are affected by our scans. The numbers here on the slides are from our survey, and you can see that the majority of operators would accept the researchers to conduct an experiment as the one from our DALI scenario in the GET case. Surprisingly, still 27 to 28% would also be okay with the post request. One of the interviewees said, at the end of the day, the bad guys do it. In general, these operators are willing to support our research. At the end of the day, the bad guys do it, right? However, they prefer to be asked for consent. This may seem desirable, but it is unfortunately not possible if we want to conduct a large-scale study as existing literature showed. Asked for any legal actions they would consider, most of them said they would first try to search for direct communication. Nevertheless, some mentioned they would be obligated to file legal complaints by their employer. Now, let's talk about our earlier mentioned idea of a pre-registration board for studies. To demonstrate what we mean by this, let me show you the usual timeline of a study. First, of course, we have to plan our study. We plan every step we do. And if we have some ethical concerns, we consult an IRB or an ERB for ethics assessment and approval. But they often only evaluate human-centered research, or especially IRBs are there to prevent negative consequences for their home institution, not the researchers themselves. And we have seen how these existing boards don't fit our research field, for example, with the Hypocrites Commit paper. In the next step, we then execute our studies, do our crawls and our queries. And usually everything goes fine and we submit the results to a conference and hope for good reviews. At the conferences, the research ethics committees, they check all studies that were marked by reviewers as ethically problematic. But as we see in this timeline, this evaluation only happens after the research has been completed. It takes place after a potential incident could have happened. So what if an incident would happen? Think about a scan that accidentally crashes a bunch of servers. The researchers would panic as soon as they would realize the problem. The companies owning the servers would probably think they are under attack and sue the researchers. And the REC would likely also not be in favor of publishing such research in their proceeding. This is why we suggest putting a research ethics committee much earlier in the process. We propose that such a board not only reviews ethical aspects of a study, but also, with the help of legal experts, considers the legal pain points of a study. To make it more general, we would rename the board to a pre-registration board. And similar to other scientific disciplines like medical research, researchers should pre-register their study at this board so that the board can provide a list of ongoing research, their scanning time slots, their IP ranges, and contact details for the operators who wanted transparency. As a result, operators have the option to check the origin of research-based scans, the option to contact researchers, as some operators in our study asked for, and of course, the option to easily opt out of a study. In fact, something the pre-registration board could also then easier provide is a list of companies that want to opt out of the research so that we researchers can easily respect this. This, of course, is only an initial proposal and many details have to be discussed. We discussed ideas with our interviewees, some of which are here on the slides and described in more details in the paper. I'm also happy to discuss this with you during the conference. One critical point is also who should be responsible for such a pre-registration board. It should be a trusted third party that all three trust: researchers, government, and industry. And we discussed with our interviewees where to position this trusted third party. Legal experts favor a government position, as only the government has the option to give legal exemptions. However, as already mentioned, the web is international, and therefore the members of ethics committees would rather prefer a community-driven, global trusted third party. The web operators we talked to, they also liked the community-driven idea, but in addition suggested an industry-driven initiative as they would better understand the needs of companies and operators. In general, all three groups like the idea, and we should consider how to push this idea forward. To conclude, we talked to many experts about server-side scanning research. Legal experts made clear we need legislative actions in an international dimension to enable such research. The good thing is, operators are open to our research. They only want us to be very transparent about what we are doing. And as for ethics, I'd say we need more ethical education and a pre-registration and reviewing process earlier on in the academic process. Thank you for your attention. The paper can be found here following the QR code, And if you are interested in a discussion about this topic, feel free to reach out. Thank you.